Okay. So our presentation is on procedural audio through this program called Wwise or Wise. We've heard it pronounced both ways. So I think for the purpose of this demonstration, we'll say Wise just because it's difficult to say Wwise every time. Let's go ahead. So let's start by talking about what procedural audio is. So procedural audio really has two schools of thought associated with it. There's one school of thought where you have to synthesize new sounds based off of player input and player interaction, or user input, user interaction. Throughout this presentation, we're focusing really on its use in video games, and so whenever we talk about it, we'll talk about the player being the user that's doing a lot of input. The other school of thought is that you don't necessarily have to synthesize these sounds through the software. You can use samples and then trigger those samples based off of the player's input, the player's actions, or where the player is. So let's say you're in a really ambient room with a lot of reverb. The sounds are going to change, and the amount of reverb is going to change based off where you are. So the implementation of procedural audio is basically that. Using it in video games specifically, if you're walking on different surfaces, if you're in different rooms, just creating that really immersive sound that's needed in, especially nowadays, a lot of 3D games. And with VR becoming such a big thing, you really need immersive sounds for that. Let's go ahead. So this is just a little timeline of Wwise. In the year 2000, Audio Kinetic was formed by this guy, Martin H. Klein, and he set out with the goal creating really, really immersive audio because at the time there was no software, no program used for that, and with the rise of 3D gaming at that time, he formed this group, Audio Kinetic, which is the company that makes Wwise. So in 2005, the first version of Wwise was unveiled at the Game Developers Conference, and it got a lot of interest. And as such, in the year 2006, the first game which implemented Wwise, which was Shadowrun, was released. And the game, it wasn't a critically acclaimed game, but it was their first game that was released using Wwise, and it was Wwise's step into the gaming world. 2011 is when it really became solidified as the industry standard, and that's because this was 1 year prior to the 8th generation of consoles being released, like the PlayStation 4, the Xbox One, that kind of stuff. And so as games were being developed for those consoles, like the Wii U, if you want to include that too, the Nintendo Switch, but as games were being developed for that generation of consoles, the game developers needed a solution for implementing audio in those games, and so Wwise marketed themselves and went to these developers and showed just how in-depth and how much control you had through the software. 2013 marked the 500th game that was shipped with Wwise, and 2017, over 500 games per year are made using Wwise. So it's this massive jump from 2006 all the way 11 years later, when you're getting thousands of games which have been produced using Wwise. And then actually in January of this year, they were purchased by Sony, which really shows how far they've come when Sony, which Wwise has, you can develop for really any system on Wwise, PlayStation 4, Xbox, mobile, Android, OS. And so when Sony purchased that, it can be seen as sort of a conflict of interest, because now Sony might, want to only use it for their PlayStation systems. But they've sort of said that they've just bought it so that they can have better access to it. So some of the advantages of Wwise is that it's really accessible without coding experience. For a lot of games, you have to be really familiar with coding and setting different command strings in order to get certain sounds to trigger. But it's a lot like a DAW in the sense that you can just drag files in, link them to certain events, you can randomize them, you can have them set in sequences, you can detune them, which is something we ran into, that a whole, the player character was randomized and so all of our sounds were, if we wanted to play a specific piano note, it was always off by like a couple like cents, and it really messed with us. It has large platform support, like I mentioned, so you can develop for really anything. Sony products, Apple, Microsoft. Unity is a big one. Unreal, list goes on. There's a lot of official courses for it as well, so you can become certified in Wwise, which, you know, is definitely useful if you're trying to get a job, because this, like I said, is the industry standard, and if you're certified in it, that's definitely a big deal. And the software, the basic version at least, is free. And the basic version is you can use up to 200 audio files, which it sounds like a lot when you're like, oh, but if I'm making a full-scale game, such as Mass Effect, which has over 50,000 lines of just dialogue, then you can see that there's like, you're going to need more than 200 audio files.
And that's where we kind of shifted to the disadvantages, which is the limitations of the base free software is the 200 sound files. So if you wanted to work on larger scale projects, you would not only need to have like a paid version, which starts at $750 just to have like unlimited sound files. You would also need to have a commercial license in order to distribute the game with Wwise in it. If you don't have a license, then you're not allowed to distribute the game, and it would be for non-commercial use or educational use.
And the interesting thing about Wwise is that you have to buy a new license for every game that you want to create. You can't just buy the program and use it for every game that you create.
Yeah. So you might have remembered from the beginning slide that we talked about the two schools of thought. In terms of pure synthesis, or like just generating sound in real time based on in-game parameters, Wwise is not exactly the best, even with VSTs, when you're trying to create this. At most it has a simple oscillator to create like static noise for like a waterfall. But if you really wanted to get in depth and create more complex sounds, Wwise may not be the best option unless there's like a very in-depth VST out there. All right, so in terms of opportunities and applications, the most obvious one is, of course, with game audio, which Wwise was made specifically to create and integrate fully immersive audio into a game engine, so that someone with no coding experience could easily go into the game and just create the sound design without having to worry about that middle ground of knowing how to code or program. And of course, if we're talking about game audio, we're obviously talking about 3D spatialization, which Wwise has a lot of partnerships right now with different companies like Oculus or Steam to create new plugins for Wwise to have more complex like 3D spatialization. So for example, they right now have their own, which is Wwise Spatial Audio. They have Real Space 3D, Steam Audio, and Oculus Spatialization. So a less obvious example, it would be integration of Wwise in automobiles for like safety and interactive 3D audio. So for example, it's like you're about to steer off the road, and Wwise is able to detect anomalies in your steering so that it can set off an alarm and wake you up and not cause an accident, basically.
Yeah, a lot of cars that run Linux for automobiles will integrate this. I know my car was built in 2005, so it doesn't have it, but new cars like the Teslas and stuff, if you're changing the lane, you know, it goes beep, 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 and you hear it, or if there's like someone in your blind spot and you have that blind spot monitor that lets you know someone's there. That's, you know, procedural audio, because it's detecting that something's there and it's playing that sound based off someone else's actions.
Yeah, it's not just going to play the sound at random and kill you. So when we came up with the Capstone project, we both came up with like a singular idea, which was an interactive game in which the player character would interact with different objects in the environment. Each object would then trigger a different sound sample or a set of sound samples, which would then layer on top of one another to create a new composition as you play through the game. There's a lot of games like this, but the main focus would be to use a free version of Wwise and its 200 sound limitation to really outline like the power of Wwise with just those 200 sound library. And so the prerequisites for the Capstone project would of course be submitting a demo of the game. Whatever license you want, you would need to submit an active demo of your game in order to actually receive a license. They need to know that you have a game in progress, otherwise you can't receive an actual license. For non-educational licenses, for educational licenses, it's a little different. You would need the permission from your professors or the university itself, Dr. Wolek or Dr. Chaz, to be able to receive the license and then possibly actually teach Wwise at your school. As far as then of course we need to create a sound library which does not exceed the 200 sound limit. And in terms of Stetson investment, we would maybe need a avenue to like actually present the project in our senior year, which would probably be just like a regular conference hall with like a good surround system.
Yeah.
And perhaps some like Foley equipment that wouldn't be available to us inside of Stetson on like a regular basis.
Yeah. Because you don't always want to like take up the sound studio if you just want to record like pouring water or something. You know, you want to have the Foley equipment there so that you can get those like everyday sounds and include them in the game.
Yeah. And
yeah, those are our sources. Basically, when we were thinking of the two ideas for a capstone project, Jose went the route of like creating a game and like including all the audio for that game. When I thought of it, I wanted to like make the game in such a way that you're like making a composition the whole time throughout the game, and so that's what we did in our demo. We showcased a little bit of what you could do with that.
All right, so here's the. So what we did to create this demo is that there's actually a free game that you can install with Wwise in order to actually mess around with the program and get to learning how to use Wwise. And here's the project session for Wwise.
Yeah, so this is what Wwise looks like before you've created the sound engine within the game, the sound bank.
So everything works in a master mixer hierarchy. So every single sound has like different samples that it can trigger as soon as an action in game occurs.
Right. And if you hold on, I'm just going to go over here. If you look at these right here. Sorry, I know you can point with the pointer, but if you look at those, yeah. So those are random containers, so all the files within those will play randomly. And you can set it to avoid repeating, at certain intervals. You can pitch them, which is what we didn't realize that's what that was doing. So we were playing piano notes, and we're like, why are these all out of tune every single time? And it was because they had a pitch randomizer on this, and then they also had it on the main character mixer as well. And so it was randomizing by 5 cents once, and then another 5 cents the next one.
Yeah, of course. Yep. And so what we did for our demo is that we replaced all of the sounds for the footsteps while walking on dirt and gravel with a pentatonic scale.
Yeah, we used a pentatonic scale of just a piano. And we got these sound files from the University of Iowa, like electronic music department. They recorded like every note on the piano, violin, like all these different instruments, and you can just go and download them. The only thing is they're AIFF files, so we had to convert these to WAV files, but that was no biggie. So we used a pentatonic scale because it was going to sound, better than if we were just playing random notes a whole bunch of time. This is actually going to sound cohesive.
Yep.
But the first time we actually did use a chromatic scale, and it sounded like you were in a horror movie. Which, if you're going for that, like, totally.
Yeah. One cool thing about Wwise is that in some aspects it does actually function kind of like a DOS. So if you can actually double-click this SFX icon down here, you can actually set the faders to each sound. So originally the faders were all the way down here, so the sound would reverberate for 25 seconds, which was not ideal for footsteps. So we just set it back down here. Oh, gee, thank you, Wwise. We just set it back down here, so it's like a 3-second.
Yeah. And based off how this game is set up, it's also going to change the spatialization, change the amount of reverb depending on if you're in an enclosed area or if you're outside in an open area.
Yep. All right, so it's 11:34, so we gotta show the
He does that automatically, changes the reverberation, or do you have to like set something?
You set it up. It was set up already when we got this game demo, but you would have to go into the like actor hierarchy and set different environments, and then inside the game, when you're in edit mode, set what kind of environment that would be considered. So this is the game.
Can you guys see that okay, or should I just?
Get both the lights.
Yeah, if you just
Visual lights.
turn off the front
Yeah.
lights, which I think are the ones.
Which one?
I forget. Those are the sides. I'm trying the button underneath the.
So that's underneath.
Yeah, that's much. Yeah.
So these are just footsteps on concrete and gunshot sounds. And if you listen closely, you can hear the change. Like if we fire the gun in this area. Okay. And you can hear that reverb. And then if we were to take a step outside, you could hear that the reverb changes.
Okay, so.
So we also changed the footsteps whenever you're walking gravel to be this piano. And did we change the fist?
No, we just.
Okay, we're just punching. So anytime you take a step, it's going to randomly choose a piano note to play from the pentatonic scale that we included. One of the applications I thought of is, I don't know if you guys have heard of 12-tone music, but you can set it so it won't repeat one of the notes within the last 11 notes that have been played. And so you could essentially create a real-time 12-tone composition and have each instrument be like a different gun that you were using, or the footsteps, things like that.
Yep. I think that's about it.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah.
If you want to go into edit mode,
Oh, yeah,
it should just be like E.
You mean back to Wwise?
If you, no, in the program. If you
Well, before you leave, walk around for us a little bit.
Yeah.
So we can hear it.
So this actually does react to like every footstep if I just. Yep. So you mean edit mode in here, or?
Yeah, if you press E, it should hit you into edit mode. Right. So we can see like through this, you can see all the different like audio triggers. All those little dots are different triggers in the world, and different like spatializations, different effects that are going to be used at that location. So if we were to go over and pick up like one of those packs of armor, I don't think you can pick it up in edit mode, so you got to wait. You can hear the sound that we play. And if you go back, I mean, it's still there because it's going to regenerate after a certain amount of time, but that's like the audio rated for it, that little bit.
Yep. Okay. And I think that's it.
Basically. Oh, no question? Yeah.
Did you say that it has its own audio samples built into it, or do you have to provide your own samples?
If you use this like demo that they can provide you, it has its own audio files that you can use. But like if you were to just open up a completely new session of Wwise, you'd have to, before you even started inputting audio files, you'd have to set a lot of like settings and a lot of hierarchies so that it knows what orders to play them in, like what the main character is, what different effects in the environment are. So, I mean, that would take forever in order to get all that set up. Yeah.
Cool.
Yep.
Yeah.
You don't need like the other games that were like made with Wwise?
Yeah, I mean, most of the Assassin's Creed games were made with them. The most recent Call of Duty, I mean, like really any AAA game that you can think of was created with Wwise. The other program that is industry standard is called Fmod Studio, and that's really used for like smaller companies, indie companies, because it doesn't go into as much depth of the different spatialization effects you can add as Wwise does. Now, Fmod just released an update where it's like apparently way better and way closer to Wwise, but that's mainly what Wwise is used for, is because it's that in-depth kind of stuff.
Trying to think of a question. Well, so talk about the learning curve. I mean, first can you get next to the mic so that I pick up both.
Oh, yeah,
Yes.
sorry.
Talk a little about the learning curve that you guys, based on experience you had with other programs and how that translated into using a program like Wwise.
Well, it was definitely, everything looks completely different, and you have
Absolutely,
to,
yeah.
I'm not used to working with different hierarchies like that and setting parameters like different if, like then statements. So if the player does this, then this sound will trigger.
Right.
But once you get that stuff sorted out, it works just like a DAW in that you drag in different files. And essentially, once you have all the settings set up, the files, you shouldn't have to do much to the actual files.
The real issue would come in from like actually matching the hierarchy to the actual events in the game, which requires you to like generate the sound library into the game, and that would lead to like more integration issues, which
Yeah.
would like struggle with if we hadn't had a cube. Yeah,
And
sorry.
Go ahead. Okay, so every time you want to like create a new, what is it called, sound
library.
Yeah, sound library for the game. You can't just like do that quickly. You have to select all the sound files, generate the whole sound library, and load it into the game, and then you can test to see if the sound like is doing what you want it to do.
Right.
So that's, I guess, a drawback, and in a way, it's a good thing because it requires you to test every sound in the game.
Basically.
And so, if you were working on, or if your goal is to do a senior project with this technology, do you see yourself partnering with somebody who's developing a game, or do you feel like there's enough tool? Because it is a kind of a secondary tool, right? It's there to generate audio for these interactive experiences. Is there enough there to build a project that's just you working with Wwise, or do you really need to partner with somebody who's doing the visual content?
Ideally, we might want to partner with someone doing the visual content, so that both sides have like their own level of detail, as opposed to us like creating a game and then having it have the visual aspect being like lower detail than the audio aspect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you could make it extremely simple and just have like patches of different things to walk on, different weapons, and have it be that simple. But if you wanted to create like an immersive kind of game, it would probably be better to work with someone who was pursuing that.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, thanks. One more round of applause.
Thanks.
Thank you.